How do we know we're doing it right? Well, I'm going to give you a brief background on typography, a quick anatomy lesson, how to make great font choices for your websites, and how not to look like a total rookie without needing to get a master's degree in the art of type. Hey friends, welcome back. What is typography? Well, it's what language looks like. That's a direct quote from Ellen Lupton. Couldn't have said it better myself. Now on to the timeline of typography. Because I don't want to be boring, I'm going to condense about 580 years of typography in about 1 minute. Should be fun. Obviously, words and language have been written on paper, parchment, sheepskin, stone, whatever, for like ever. But typography really took off in about 1440 with the printing press. And the first book to ever be printed, it was the Gutenberg Bible. Now, the typeface used was in a handwritten script style, commonly used in the medieval age religious writing. We call it blackletter or Gothic. Looks like this. Literally, that's how monks could write by hand. Couldn't say that for myself. Here's how typography evolved throughout the centuries. In the 15th century, we had the script-style typefaces, kind of like the monotype Old English style text. And as we traverse through the next couple centuries, we see it morph into a serif-style font. Through the 18th to 20th centuries, we start seeing modern display-style fonts that take on all sorts of shapes, sizes, and variants. Imagine these fonts being used in newspapers, old advertisements, and eventually marquee banners for theater shows, even television. By the 21st century, as we enter our digital age, we start seeing fonts that suit screens, namely the sans serif font. Now, there's millions of fonts out there of all shapes, sizes, styles, variants, and so on. You could even create your own font. Now that we've ripped through nearly 600 years of history, let's have an anatomy lesson. Look at this word, typography. It's set in a serif-style font. Remember as kids when we would have to write out letters on a lined notebook to help us improve our handwriting? Imagine that. At the bottom of the capital letter T, imagine a line that extends the entire length of the word. That's called the baseline. Now imagine another line at the very top of the capital letter T, framing the letter. That's called the cap height. What about our lowercase letters? They all have a unified height as well, but it doesn't reach the cap height. Well, that's called the X height. Now you'll notice that some of the lowercase letters extend below the baseline. That's called a descender. And the parts that extend above the X height, that's called an ascender. What about these fancy little swoops and embellishments we see on letters like the lowercase p or h? Those are called serifs. Hence the serif style font, which makes it look more handwritten and sophisticated, almost like it was designed for print. That's because it was. Now, serif versus sans serif. You may recall me mentioning this sans serif style font. Well, sans or sans is a French word for without. So we get a simplistic font without the serif. And let's be honest, nobody says sans serif, although that does sound pretty good. Maybe I'll start saying that more. But I'd have to be drinking wine while doing so. It only makes sense. Sans serif. Font weight. Okay, I know talking about weight is a taboo subject, but sorry typography, you come in many shapes and sizes and we've got to talk about it. Like ultralight, regular, medium, demi-bold, bold, and heavy. And on the web, specifically when coding websites, in CSS we also measure font weight with numbers, and pretty big ones, from 100 to 900. When drinking wine, one might pair it with cheese. When drinking beer, one might eat a pound of chicken wings. Scotch goes particularly well with dark chocolate. Seriously. So, oh yeah, typography lesson. Right. You can use pairing with your fonts as well. Some fonts play well together, others are just preposterous. Pairing your fonts on your website can create a visual interest, hierarchy when formatting large bodies of text, and contrast to draw attention to certain areas, like a headline for a sales page. A good rule of thumb is to stick with 2 fonts for your website. One can be a little monotonous, 3 font choices ventures into dangerous territory, although it can be done. And any more than 3 fonts, well, you just make yourself look like an overexcited kid in a candy store. One might pair a serif heading with a sans serif body, or sans serif heading with a serif body. A heavy font weight with a light font weight. Alignment. It's pretty simple. Left aligned, center aligned, right aligned, justified alignment. Some basic rules. When in doubt, always left align, especially large chunks of body text. Don't center align large bodies of text. It looks bad, it's hard to read, and it is a telltale sign you are not a designer. You can center align headings and subheadings for impact and visual interest, and buttons work splendidly well with center alignment. Line length. This is how long or wide your text is across the screen. If there are too many characters in a single line, it will be hard to read. Too short, it's just weird. Optimal line length is 50 to 60, and sometimes people say 75 characters per line. It's easier to read, and it will reduce eye fatigue. Line height, also called leading, it's the vertical space between each line of your text. Measured in percent, but can also be measured with decimals, rem, or pixel on the web. Aim for 100% to 130% line height for body copy, and 80 to 100% for large headings. These are guidelines, but good ones, so try to stick to them. Now, here are some other weird words that designers use when it comes to typography. Kerning. It's the space between individual characters. Will you ever need to adjust this as a web designer? Probably never. Tracking is the overall space between all of the characters in a line of text. You might use tracking for headlines if you want a more condensed look or a breathy feel. Fonts in context. Different font choices evoke emotions and feelings, and you could use fonts in the wrong context. For example, in a sophisticated design for a museum, you wouldn't use a silly display font to communicate their message. But you might use that silly display font on a website for an author of children's books. And there you have it, folks. All you'll probably ever need to know about typography for the web. You don't need to memorize all this stuff, because as we start designing things and building sites, we'll address typography as we go. And as with many things, you'll get better at this with practice. Now get out of here and go build something.